All right. Today's gospel reading is from Mark chapter 15, verses 16 through 28, and also 33 through 41. As always, I'll be doing the explanation according to the Blessed Theophylact, who is an archbishop from the Ohrid region of Bulgaria from the 11th century. 16 through 21. And the soldiers led him away into the hall called Praetorium, and they called together the whole cohort, and they clothed him with purple and plaited a crown of thorns and put it on about his head, and began to salute him, Hail, King of the Jews! And they smote him on the head with a reed, and did spit upon him, and bowing their knees, worshipped him. And when they had mocked him, and they took off the purple from him, and they put his own clothes on him, and led him out to crucify him. And they compel one Simon of Assyrian, who passed by, coming out of the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to bear his cross. The explanation there. Soldiers as a group revel in commotions, tumults, and insults, and these soldiers here displayed behavior that was only natural to them. For if the Jews, who had received innumerable teachings and blessings, were so disposed towards Jesus, what can we say in accusation of these Gentile soldiers? They called together the whole cohort, meaning the whole battalion of soldiers stationed there, and clothed him with purple, mocking him as a king. And these servants of the devil did give him the crown of thorns instead of a diadem, and a reed instead of a scepter. And they compel one to bear his cross, although another evangelist says that Jesus went forth bearing his cross. And it says in John 19:17. Both of these things happened, for Jesus himself carried the cross part of the way, and then, when they found someone to carry it for him, they pressed that man into service, and he carried the cross the rest of the way. Why does the evangelist mention that Simon was the father of Alexander and Rufus? As a greater confirmation of the truth of this account, for it is very likely that Simon was still living when St. Mark wrote his gospel, and could relate everything that happened concerning the cross. Let us also wear the purple, by which I mean the royal garment. For we ought to go about like kings, treading underfoot serpents and scorpions, and ruling over sin. For we are called Christians, that is, we too are the anointed, just as the kings were also known as Christ, that is, the anointed. Therefore, our lives should not be servile and ignoble, but instead free and kingly. And let us also wear the crown of thorns, that is, let us strive to be crowned with a strict life of self-control and abstinence, and not of luxury and gratification and pleasures. Let us also become Simon, whose very name means obedience, and let us take up the cross of Jesus, mortifying our carnal passions. Verses 22 through 28. And they bring him unto the place Golgotha, which is, being interpreted, the place of the skull. And they gave him to drink wine mingled with myrrh, but he received it not. And when they had crucified him, they parted his garments, casting lots upon them what every man should take. And it was the third hour, and they crucified him. And a superscription of his accusation was written over, the King of the Jews. And with him they crucified two thieves, one on his right hand and the other on his left. And the scripture was fulfilled, which saith, and he was numbered with the transgressors. An explanation here. There is a tradition that has come down to us from the Holy Fathers that Adam was buried in that place. By being crucified here, the Lord heals both the sin and the death of Adam, and on the place where death began, there is death destroyed. They gave him to drink wine mingled with myrrh. Myrrh is most bitter to the taste, therefore, by giving this to the Lord, they mocked him. Another evangelist says that vinegar with gall was offered to the Lord. It says in Matthew 27:34. And yet another evangelist says vinegar with hyssop. It says John in 19:29. There is nothing contradictory in this. For there was disorder and commotion, and some offered him one thing, and others something else, so that vinegar and gall and wine mixed with myrrh were all offered. Or perhaps the wine was vinegary, and the myrrh was bitter, so that the evangelist who speaks of wine mingled with myrrh is in agreement with the evangelist who speaks of vinegar and gall. For the wine may be the same thing as vinegar, if it is vinegary, and the myrrh may be the same thing as gall because of its bitterness. Neither is there a contradiction between Mark and Matthew when the one says they gave him to drink, but he received it not, and the other says, and when he had tasted thereof, he would not drink. certainly by saying he received it not. Mark shows that Jesus did not drink of it. They cast lots for his garments and did this, and this too they did in mockery, as if they were dividing not his poor garments, but the garments of a king. They wrote his title, that is, the accusation against him, for which he was crucified, the King of the Jews. So that by this means, as well as they could dishonor his fame and reputation, making it appear that he was a fomenter of insurrection and had called himself king, so that those who passed by would not pity him, but instead would revile him as a failed usurper. How is it that Mark says that he was crucified at the 3rd hour, but Matthew says that there was darkness at the 6th hour? It can be explained thus. He was crucified at the 3rd hour, and the darkness began at the 6th hour, and lasted until the 9th hour. They crucified the Lord between two thieves, so that people would think badly of him, as if he too were an evildoer like those thieves. But this took place by God's providence, for the prophecy was thus fulfilled, and he was numbered with transgressors, as it says in Isaiah 53:12. Also, the two thieves are a symbol of the two peoples, the Jews and the Gentiles. Both were transgressors. The Gentiles transgressed the natural law, while the Jews transgressed both the natural and the written law given to them by the God. The grateful thief represents the Gentiles, but the thief who blasphemed until his end represents the Jews. The Lord is crucified between two thieves, for he is the cornerstone, joining us Jews and Gentiles together. Verses 33 through 37. And when the 6th hour was come, there was darkness over the whole earth until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is being interpreted, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And some of them that stood by, when they heard it, said, Behold, he calleth Elijah. And one ran and filled a sponge full of vinegar, and put it on a reed, and gave him to drink, saying, Let alone, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down. And Jesus cried with a loud voice, and breathed his last breath. And the explanation there was darkness, not in one place only, but over the whole earth. If it were possible for an eclipse to have occurred at that time, one could say that the event was natural, but it was the 14th day of the lunar cycle, a full moon, when a natural eclipse is impossible. The Lord cries out in the Hebrew language the words of the prophet, and showing until his last breath that he honors the Hebrew things. In his human nature he spoke the words, Why hast thou forsaken me? As if he were saying, O God, why hast thou forsaken me, a man, so that I am in need of God to be crucified for me? For it is we, mankind, who had been forsaken, but Christ was never forsaken by the Father. Listen to what he says, I am not alone, but the Father is with me. Or by another interpretation, he spoke those words on behalf of the Hebrew people. He himself, being a Hebrew in flesh, why hast thou forsaken me, the Hebrew people, so that they crucify thy Son? Just as we are accustomed to say, God hath put on me, meaning God has put on my human nature, so here understand, why hast thou forsaken me? Why hast thou forsaken my human nature? Or, why hast thou forsaken my people, the Jews? One ran and gave him vinegar to drink, so that the sharpness of the vinegar would kill him more quickly. Before breathing his last, Jesus cried out with a great voice, as if he were summoning death as its master, and dying by his own authority. Luke has told us the words he spoke when he cried out, Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. For this is yet another thing which the Lord has achieved for us, that at death the spirits of the saints ascend into the hands of God. Formerly, all souls were held in Hades, until he came who proclaimed liberty to the captives. And verses 38 through 41, And the veil of the temple was rent in twain, from the top to the bottom. And when the centurion, who stood over against him, saw that he so cried out and breathed his last, he said, Truly this man was the Son of God. There were also women looking on afar off, among whom was Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James the younger, and of Joses and Salome, who also, when he was in Galilee, followed him and ministered unto him, and many other women which came up with him unto Jerusalem. And the explanation here, The veil was rent as a sign from God that the grace of the Holy Spirit had departed from the temple, and so that all could see and enter into the Holy of Holies, which indeed occurred when the Roman army entered the temple. The veil was also rent as a sign that even the temple mourned the crucifixion of the Lord. Just as the Jews have the custom of tearing their garments during such calamities, so too the temple itself, as if it were a living being, showed its grief for the Creator who suffered and tore its own garment. The rent veil shows something else as well. Man's flesh is the veil, or covering, of the temple, which is his mind. And so the power which the flesh had over the spirit was rent by the sufferings of Christ from the top to the bottom, that is, from Adam until the last man. Even Adam was sanctified by the sufferings of Christ, and his flesh will no longer be cursed nor subject to corruption. And likewise, incorruption has been bestowed upon us all. When the centurion, that is, the captain of 100, for a centum in Latin means 100, saw how Jesus as master of life, gave up his life, he marveled and confessed him. See how the order of things are reversed. The Jews put him to death, but the Gentile confesses him, and the disciples flee, while the women remain by his side. There were also women, the evangelist says, among whom was Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph. This Mary was the Theotokos, the mother of God, who, because she had been betrothed to Joseph, was called the mother of James and Joseph, who were among Joseph's children by his first marriage. She was called mother, meaning stepmother, just as she was called Joseph's wife, instead of, more precisely, his betrothed. Salome was the mother of the sons of Zebedee, James and John, and there were many other women disciples present, but Mark mentions by name only the most prominent of them.